Good evening, class. As we have seen from this week's reading of Boethius' Consolation of Philosophy, the book is primarily concerned with how he deals with questions regarding his own misfortune, imprisonment, and imminent death. From Book 1, we learned that Boethius' imprisonment, that before his imprisonment he had been a wealthy man and enjoyed a high position in government, but that due to some underhanded maneuvering from his rivals, he had been falsely accused of co-conspiring with the Byzantine Empire. Boethius considers himself especially misfortunate because until now he believed that his wealth and success had been recompense for living a principled and ethical life. From his writing, it is implied that his innocence and noble nature causes the personification of wisdom in the form of Lady Philosophy to spring forth in order to assist him in dealing with his present situation. In helping with his ailment, Lady Philosophy takes on the role of a doctor, and after talking to him for a while, decides that what Boethius needs or what he's truly suffering from, is misconceptions, ignorance, and not truly understanding the nature of his being. In prescribing a remedy for his ailments, she decides that what he needs are dosages of successively stronger medications, which for his purposes take on the form of philosophic dialogue. The motive behind providing weak and then strong medications is to ensure that he is equipped to deal with the stronger truths that will ultimately cure him from what he seems to be suffering from. Under what she calls the milder remedies, Boethius, through the person of Lady Philosophy, uses what he calls rhetoric to anesthetize him from what is to follow. As Matthew Waltz tells us in his paper Stoicism as Anesthesia, Philosophy's Gentler Remedies, philosophy is essentially utilizing Stoic thought as a means to make Boethius numb from his circumstances so he can concentrate on the dialogue that is to follow. In my own paper, Boethius and the Consolation of Stoic Philosophy, I argue that using Stoicism only as a milder remedy and then departing from it was a matter of choice in order to support his true Neoplatonic beliefs. In making this argument, I point out that the move towards Stoicism was necessary because his Platonic/Aristotelian ethic was ill-equipped to handle the issue of real-life misfortune. In the third section of the paper, I move on to show that had he been willing to forego the medieval Christian endgame, he would have found that Stoicism provided plenty of strong remedy. A comprehensive reading of the Consolation, Boethius' commentary on Porphyry's Isagogy, and prior knowledge of Neoplatonic thought in general makes it possible to surmise that Boethius subscribed to this particular philosophy as his own. Evidence of Boethius' Neoplatonic tendencies are indicated by his overarching conclusion that God was the source of all good and that evil did not really exist, but was rather simply a lesser form of the good. Further reading of the Consolation does reveal that he also had an affinity for Aristotelian thought, as well as that of the Stoics. History of the medieval Christian philosophy tells us that marrying the thoughts of Aristotle and Plato was actually quite common. Medieval philosophers were able to bypass the dramatic discrepancies between Aristotelian and Platonic epistemology by making the former subservient to the latter. If you're a little rusty on those two concepts, that's okay. Traditionally, Aristotelian and Platonic thought were considered to be somewhat at odds with each other because Aristotle rejected the idea of the existence of universal forms, which Plato considered essential for the existence of God. The relationship between the universals and God was that the universals was considered a good because they provided truth, and God, being the shaper of things, was what allowed the universals to become material and therefore known to us. That is not to say that Aristotle rejected the idea of God. It's just that he went about finding God in a different sort of way. For Aristotle, God manifested himself in the notion that all things have an end or purpose, and God was the prime mover that allowed for this end. For him, universal simply described how the mind made sense of these things through the use of reason. As I previously mentioned, medieval thinkers were able to marry these two thoughts by restricting Aristotelian thought to material things, and then allowing Plato to pick things up as Christian thought moved into the immaterial. Excuse me. This, of course, raises the question of why Boethius would bother to pursue Stoicism as a third alternative if he ultimately had his eyes set on Neoplatonism. The answer, as alluded to in the introduction, is that despite the fact that Aristotle had been given dominion over the physical world in matters of philosophy, his ethics were woefully unprepared to deal with the type of misfortune that Boethius was dealing with. Reflecting on Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics, we see that the Greek philosopher describes eudaimonia, or happiness from a flourishing life, as being a collection between right action, the exercise of virtue, having family, friends, being self-sufficient, and also having all the good things that life can provide, like wealth and health. Aristotle is careful to point out that each of these by their own accord cannot be the source of the supreme good, and in fact, Boethius' Lady Philosophy largely uses Aristotle's arguments to show why wealth, honors, and fame are not sufficient for the attainment of the good life. In matters of misfortune due to chance incidents, however, Aristotle becomes eerily silent. Instead, in his Ethics, he only makes a distinction between being blessed and being happy. He tells us that the former is a matter of chance and somewhat necessary for the latter, and for that reason he only focuses on matters of choice, since that is really what the individual has control over. He goes on to say that a person can be considered happy even if in the face of misfortune, if over a lifetime he has exercised his virtue and acted nobly. From this characterization of happiness, it becomes apparent that his view of happy but misfortunate person is a matter of external observation. By way of example, we can imagine an old man who has led a good life, has had many children, accrued wealth, had many friends, and lived honestly, but happened to lose his beloved wife. Aristotle would have said that the old man was indeed happy, even if the loss of his wife had been devastating and caused him to die shortly after. And this is in fact Boethius' reason to abandon Aristotle's view and take up that of the Stoics in his own predicament. No matter how happy his life would appear to an outside observer under Aristotle's view, it did nothing to remedy the pain of his own subjective situation. He felt grieved and cheated from a life that he felt he had earned and left bereft of any recourse in justice. In terms of attaining solace, Stoicism proves to be much more useful because its chief aim is apatheia, or apathy, only requires that one exercise the same virtues of temperance, justice, and courage. Wealth and fame and all the other goods that were considered lesser forms of good, but still good, or still a good in Aristotle's world, were inconsequential, because if one became invested in them, it would be possible to be less happy if they were taken away. For that reason, under the Stoics, happiness was much less important than renouncing attachment and emotion. It was much better to not feel anything at all than feel the highs and lows of fortune's wheel. Unfortunately, the cosmological and theological conclusions that the Stoics presented were insufficient in order to support a Judeo-Christian view of God, and therefore had to be abandoned by Boethius as he made his way to the stronger remedies. The idea that Lady Philosophy allows Boethius to pick and choose a remedy that works for him is defended by Antonio Donato in his article Forgetfulness and Misology in Boethius' Consolation of Philosophy. According to Donato, Lady Philosophy's intent is not to teach him doctrine, but rather to leave him with a higher understanding of philosophical precepts and how to live according to it. This high understanding appears to concentrate around the concepts of harmony and order as they pertain to God. Close inspection of the Aristotelian, Neoplatonic, and Stoic teleological ends reveal that they all support the idea of harmony and order as an aspect of the divine. So in this sense, Lady Philosophy appears more interested in getting Boethius to buy into this overarching idea of cosmic order than getting him to agree on a specific view, even if his own view turns out to be inaccurate. Where these philosophical schools do differ is in how much of the divine they are willing to invest in the rest of nature. For example, the Stoics thought was that God was immanent, that's with an I, in nature, so God did not exist outside of it, and nature itself became God. Obviously, this would not work with the would-be Christians, since Christian doctrine would say that nature is something that God made ex nihilo, rather than a material presentation of himself. Aristotle also gets passed on because his version of God as a prime mover is too detached from creation once nature has gathered momentum. And at times it would seem that his God has no further control over it. Neoplatonism then seems to provide the most efficient way to get Boethius to agree to God's cosmic harmony because it is more readily compatible with Christian thoughts. As Plotinus would have said, God becomes a source of emanation, that's with an E, for all of nature, but also a vehicle of transcendence. As things become more material and specific, they move away from God and perfection, and just the same as they become more immaterial and good, they become more perfect and closer to God. Boethius can rest easy in his upcoming demise because he is trading in his virtuous but corporeal being for something that is higher and more akin to God. Well, everyone, that was my presentation. If there's anything on here that you think requires further explanation, please let me know. Also, if there's something that I plainly missed, I welcome the commentary as well. My paper is still in the editing stage, so I have the flexibility to make adjustments as necessary. I thank you for your time, and I look forward to our conversations online. Thank you.